Commander Zarketh sat in his observation pod, floating in the darkness beyond Neptune. He had been watching Earth for 6 months now, and something about these humans bothered him. Not in a bad way exactly, but in a way that made his 3 hearts beat faster whenever he studied their transmissions. Zarketh was a Valorian, member of one of the oldest civilized races in the galaxy. His people had stopped fighting wars 3 million years ago. They had evolved past violence, past the primitive need for conflict. They observed younger species, cataloged them, and waited for them to grow peaceful enough to join the galactic community. It was a good system, a logical system. The observation pod was small but comfortable. Screens covered every wall, showing different parts of Earth. News broadcasts, military channels, entertainment programs, and scientific communications all flowed through his computers. Zarketh had learned all major human languages in his first week. Languages were easy for Valorians. Understanding what the words actually meant was harder. He had been doing this job for 30 years. 30 years of watching primitive species grow and change. Some destroyed themselves, some evolved peacefully, most just stayed the same for thousands of years, neither advancing nor falling back. Humans were different. They changed constantly, rapidly, chaotically. Every decade brought new technology, new ideas, new conflicts. The conflicts bothered him most. Humans fought over everything. Resources, ideas, invisible lines on maps, ancient grudges and concepts so abstract that Zarketh could barely understand them. They fought over which invisible being they believed created the universe. They fought over what color skin was superior. They fought over economic systems and political theories. It seemed wasteful and primitive. But they also did something else, something Zarketh had never seen in any other species. They fought for each other. A human soldier would throw himself on an explosive device to save his companions. A human mother would walk into fire to save her child. A human stranger would jump into freezing water to rescue someone they had never met. This made no logical sense. The individual was sacrificing guaranteed survival for a small chance to save another. The math did not work. Zarketh had written 17 reports trying to explain this behavior. His superiors kept sending them back, asking for clarification. How could he clarify what he did not understand himself? On this particular morning, his sensors detected increased military activity in Eastern Europe. A regional conflict had been building for weeks. Zarketh had watched the diplomatic channels, seen the troop movements, predicted the outbreak of violence within a 3-day window. He had been correct within 6 hours. Valorian models of primitive behavior were very accurate. He adjusted his sensors to focus on the combat zone. A coalition force from several Western nations had deployed to support a smaller country against invasion. The numbers were not in their favor. The invading force had more soldiers, more equipment, and better supply lines. By Valorian calculations, the coalition should withdraw or negotiate surrender within 72 hours. Zarketh decided to observe more closely. He had never watched human combat operations in real time. His vessel could cloak itself perfectly, making it invisible to human sensors. He plotted a course that would bring him into low orbit over the battle zone. The journey would take 3 hours. During the flight, Zarketh reviewed human military history. It was extensive and bloody. Humans had been fighting organized wars for at least 5,000 years, probably longer. The records showed constant conflict, broken only by brief periods of peace. Weapons had evolved from sharpened stones to nuclear devices capable of destroying entire cities. The death toll across human history numbered in the hundreds of millions. Yet humans kept detailed records of their wars. They built monuments to the dead. They wrote songs and poems about battles. They created entire academic fields dedicated to studying military history. They seemed to honor their warriors even while claiming to hate war. This contradiction puzzled Zarketh. The Valorians had purged all records of their violent past. It was considered shameful to remember the time before Enlightenment. Zarketh only knew his people had once been warriors because the basic historical facts were required learning for observers. The details had been erased millions of years ago. His vessel entered low orbit and positioned itself over the combat zone. The tactical display showed the situation clearly. A human unit, approximately 200 soldiers, had been cut off from the main force. They occupied a valley surrounded by mountains. Enemy forces, numbering over 600, were moving to encircle them. Human command was attempting to organize a rescue, but it would take at least 18 hours. The trapped unit would not last that long. Zarketh accessed the Coalition military communications. They were not encrypted strongly enough to stop Valorian technology. He listened as the trapped unit's commander, a Captain Jake Morrison, received his orders. Extract if possible. Dig in if not. Hold position and wait for relief. The words were simple and clear. Captain Morrison acknowledged the orders. Then he gathered his soldiers and explained the situation. They were cut off. Outnumbered 3-1. Relief was coming but might not arrive in time. They could attempt to break through enemy lines and retreat, but that would leave their position open and endanger the main force. Or they could hold and trust that help would arrive. Zarketh watched the human faces on his screen. He had studied human expressions for months. He recognized fear. Every soldier in that valley was afraid. Their heart rates were elevated, their breathing quick. Some were shaking slightly. They knew they might die. Captain Morrison asked for a vote. Democracy in a military unit struck Zarketh as inefficient, but humans seemed to value it. Every soldier raised their hand to stay and fight. Not one chose retreat. The captain nodded and began organizing defensive positions. This was illogical. Retreat offered better survival odds. The mathematical models were clear. Staying to fight in a hopeless position served no tactical purpose. The enemy would simply overrun them, and the deaths would be meaningless. Why were they choosing certain death? Zarketh increased sensor resolution, focusing on individual soldiers. A young woman, Lieutenant Amy Fletcher, was directing other soldiers in digging defensive positions and setting up obstacles. She moved with confidence despite her fear. A large man, Sergeant Ben Cole, was positioning snipers on the hillsides, choosing angles that would maximize their effectiveness. His hands were steady even though his bio readings showed extreme stress. The enemy began their assault an hour later. They came in waves, using their numerical advantage to pressure the human defenses from multiple directions. Zarketh expected the human line to break quickly. It did not. The humans fought with a coordination that surprised him. They communicated constantly, sharing information and adjusting tactics in real time. When one position was threatened, soldiers from other positions provided covering fire. When ammunition ran low, they shared supplies. When someone was wounded, others dragged them to cover while still fighting. But it was not just coordination. It was something else. Something Zarketh had no word for in his language. The humans fought as if losing was not an option. They fought as if their individual survival meant nothing compared to holding that valley. They fought like the universe itself was watching, and they refused to disappoint it. Lieutenant Fletcher improvised explosive traps using equipment from a nearby village. Sergeant Cole's snipers picked off enemy officers, causing chaos in their command structure. A young corporal named Lisa Grant hacked into enemy communications and began sending false orders. The humans adapted to every enemy tactic, countered every advantage, and refused to break. Hours passed. The enemy assault continued. Human casualties mounted, but the line held. Zarketh watched in growing fascination and horror. This should not be possible. The math did not allow for this outcome, yet it was happening before his sensors. Humans were reshaping probability through nothing but stubborn determination. As the sun set over the valley, the enemy commander pulled back to regroup. The humans had held. Against superior numbers, against better positioning, against all logical probability, they had held. Captain Morrison walked among his soldiers, speaking quietly to each one. Many were wounded. All were exhausted, but they were still there, still ready to fight. Zarketh sat back in his pod, his 3 hearts racing. He had just witnessed something that should not exist. Something that challenged everything Valorians believed about warfare, survival, and the nature of intelligence itself. He needed to understand this. He needed to know how this was possible. And he needed to know if what he felt watching those humans was the emotion his people had bred out of themselves millions of years ago. The emotion humans called hope. The second day of battle began before dawn. Zarketh had not moved his observation vessel all night. He had watched the humans take turns sleeping, always keeping enough soldiers awake to maintain defensive positions. They shared their remaining food. They tended their wounded. They prepared for the next assault with quiet efficiency. Captain Morrison had not slept at all. Zarketh watched him move through the defensive positions, checking on each soldier personally. The captain's bio reading showed exhaustion, but his movements remained steady. He stopped to talk with a young private who was shaking from fear or cold or both. Whatever Morrison said made the private nod and grip his weapon tighter. The enemy attacked at dawn with everything they had. Artillery shells fell on the human positions, throwing dirt and rock into the air. Zarketh's sensors showed 3 humans killed in the first barrage, 5 more wounded. The defensive line contracted as soldiers pulled back from destroyed positions. Then the enemy infantry advanced. They moved in organized formations, professional and determined. They had learned from yesterday's failures. This assault was better planned, better coordinated. The humans would not survive it, except they did. Lieutenant Amy Fletcher had spent the night building something in a damaged building at the valley's edge. Zarketh had watched her work with equipment from the village, but he had not understood what she was creating. Now he saw. As enemy soldiers passed the building, it exploded with tremendous force. The blast killed dozens and threw the enemy formation into chaos. Fletcher had constructed an improvised explosive device using agricultural fertilizer, fuel, and electronic components from civilian vehicles. She had turned farming supplies into a military weapon overnight. The ingenuity impressed Zarketh. The fact that she had done it while under fire, exhausted and afraid, astonished him. The enemy reeled from the explosion but continued advancing. Sergeant Cole's sniper teams began firing. Each shot was careful and precise. They were not shooting at random soldiers. They targeted officers, communication specialists, and heavy weapon operators. Every shot removed a key piece of the enemy command structure. Within 10 minutes, the enemy assault had lost coordination. Units stopped communicating effectively. Orders became confused. Zarketh calculated the probability of each shot. Human weapons at that range, under combat stress, should have accuracy rates below 40%. Cole's teams were achieving 90%. It should not be possible, yet the bodies falling in enemy lines proved it was happening. Corporal Lisa Grant was inside a damaged vehicle, her portable computer connected to captured enemy communication equipment. She was speaking in the enemy's language, issuing false orders. Retreat to secondary positions. Artillery strike incoming, pull back 300 meters. Command post compromised, switch to alternate frequency. The enemy soldiers, unable to verify orders during chaotic combat, obeyed. They retreated when they should have advanced. They scattered when they should have concentrated. One human corporal was defeating an entire enemy communication network, but the enemy still had numbers. They pushed forward despite the chaos, accepting heavy losses to close with the human positions. Hand-to-hand fighting broke out along the defensive line. This was what Zarketh had expected. This was where human defenses should collapse. Instead, he witnessed something that made his blood run cold. Sergeant Cole had been directing his sniper teams when enemy soldiers overran his position. He was wounded immediately, a bullet tearing through his leg. He could not walk. By every reasonable standard, he should have surrendered or died. He did neither. Cole dragged himself to a narrow gap between rocks, a position where enemies would have to approach single file. He placed himself there deliberately, using his body to block the passage. Then he began firing. Enemy soldiers tried to rush past him. He killed them. They tried to throw grenades. He threw them back. They shot him again, hitting his shoulder. He kept firing. Zarketh watched Cole's bio readings. Pain levels that should have caused unconsciousness. Blood loss approaching critical levels. Muscle damage that should have prevented him from holding a weapon. Yet Cole kept fighting, not because he could survive, but because his position protected other soldiers behind him. It took 17 minutes for friendly forces to reach Cole and pull him back to medical treatment. In those 17 minutes, he had killed 23 enemy soldiers and prevented them from breaking through the defensive line. He had turned himself into a human wall, trading his body for time and space. This was not courage as Valorians understood it. Courage meant facing danger despite fear. What Cole did was different. He had accepted death as inevitable, and then fought anyway, not for survival but for purpose. His life became a weapon he wielded for others. Private Danny Rogers was in a similar situation on the opposite side of the valley. His position was being overrun. He could have retreated to secondary defenses. Instead, he called for artillery strike on his own location. He gave the coordinates calmly and clearly. The artillery commander refused. Rogers insisted. He argued that his position was critical, that it had to be denied to the enemy, and that he was already wounded and unable to retreat. He made it an order. The artillery fell. The enemy advance stopped. Private Rogers stopped transmitting. Zarketh stared at his screens in shock. A human soldier had called destruction down on himself to stop an enemy advance. The mathematical efficiency was undeniable. 1 human life traded for 50 enemy casualties in a secured defensive position. But the emotional weight of that decision was something Zarketh could not process. How did a being make that choice? How did a mind accept its own erasure for tactical advantage? The battle continued for 6 more hours. The humans held every position they needed to hold. When they had to fall back, they did so in organized withdrawals that cost the enemy dearly. When they found advantages, they exploited them ruthlessly. They treated their own lives as resources to be spent wisely, but spent nonetheless. By afternoon, the enemy had lost over 300 soldiers. Their ammunition was running low. Their morale was broken. They pulled back to regroup and wait for reinforcements. The humans had lost 43 killed and 78 wounded, more than half their original force. But they still held the valley. Relief forces would arrive in 3 hours. Captain Morrison gathered the surviving soldiers. Zarketh listened to his speech. The captain did not celebrate victory. He named every soldier who had died. He spoke about their sacrifice with reverence and grief. He promised to remember them. Then he ordered everyone to prepare defensive positions in case the enemy attacked again, before relief arrived. Zarketh reviewed his recordings of the battle. He analyzed every decision, every tactic, every moment of combat. The Valorian military models could not explain what had happened. By every calculation, the humans should have been overrun in the first assault. Their victory was mathematically impossible, unless the math was wrong. Unless there were variables that Valorian science had never quantified because Valorians had evolved past them. Variables like the willingness to die for abstract concepts. Like the refusal to accept defeat even when defeat was certain. Like the ability to care about something more than personal survival. Zarketh had spent 30 years studying primitive species. He had seen them fight for territory, for resources, for genetic advantage. He had never seen them fight for ideas, for loyalty, for the simple conviction that some things mattered more than living. He opened a communication channel to Valorian Expeditionary Command. His superior, Observer Prime Kelvin, appeared on the screen. The Observer Prime was ancient, wise, and completely dedicated to the logic of observation. Observer Zarketh, your report is overdue. What have you learned? Zarketh looked at the data scrolling across his screens. Human casualties, enemy casualties, tactical positions. Bio-readings from soldiers who fought past the point where their bodies should have failed. I have learned that humanity is dangerous, Zarketh said slowly. Not because of their weapons or their technology. Because of what they believe. Because they can look at certain death and choose it willingly if it serves a purpose they value. Because they fight like the universe itself will judge them. Observer Prime Kelvin tilted his head, confused. This is inefficient behavior. It serves no evolutionary advantage. I know, Zarketh said. That is what makes it terrifying. They fight for things that evolution should have eliminated. Honor, duty, love. These are not survival traits. These are choices that lead to death. Yet humans choose them anyway. The Observer Prime was quiet for a moment. Your report troubles me, Observer Zarketh. Perhaps you have been alone too long. Return to the main fleet for psychological evaluation. Zarketh looked at his screens one more time. Captain Morrison was organizing burial details for the dead. Sergeant Cole was in surgery, doctors fighting to save his leg. Corporal Grant was helping coordinate the arrival of relief forces. They moved like people who had just done something ordinary, not people who had reshaped probability itself through force of will. I cannot return, Zarketh said quietly. Not yet. I need to understand this. I need to understand them. He closed the communication channel before Observer Prime Kelvin could respond. Zarketh could not stop watching. What began as academic curiosity had become obsession. He told himself it was professional interest, necessary research for his reports. Deep down he knew it was something else, something his people had forgotten how to feel. He expanded his observation beyond the single battle. His computers began downloading human military records from databases across Earth. Historical documents, after-action reports, video footage, personal testimonies from soldiers throughout human history. The data filled his storage systems to capacity. He installed additional memory cores and kept downloading. The patterns emerged slowly, but once Zarketh saw them, he could not unsee them. In ancient times, 300 Spartan warriors held a mountain pass against hundreds of thousands of invaders. They knew they would die. They stayed anyway. The invaders won the battle but lost the war because those 300 had bought time for their people to prepare. In more recent history, a single human pilot named Alan Smith stayed at the controls of his damaged aircraft instead of ejecting to safety. He guided the falling plane away from a populated area, dying in the crash but saving thousands below. He had seconds to make that choice. He chose others over himself. During a peacekeeping mission, Lieutenant Helen Price saw a group of children caught in crossfire. She left cover, ran to them, and used her own body as a shield. She was hit 4 times. The children survived. When asked why she did it, she said she could not live with herself if she had not tried. ZarKeth found hundreds of similar stories. Thousands. They spanned all of human history. All cultures, all types of conflict. The details change, but the core remained constant. Humans chose sacrifice. They chose it consciously, deliberately, sometimes even eagerly. He studied Staff Sergeant Chris Bailey, who defended a wounded squad alone for 4 hours. Bailey had been shot twice in the first exchange. He could have retreated. Instead, he held his position, firing until his ammunition was gone, then throwing rocks, then fighting with a knife. Relief forces found him unconscious from blood loss, surrounded by 27 dead enemy soldiers. He survived and said he was just doing his job. ZarKeth analyzed Corporal Nina Shaw, who threw herself over 3 refugee children during an artillery barrage. She knew the shells were coming. She had time to take cover. She chose to cover the children instead. She lost both legs but saved all 3 children. When interviewed, she said she did not think about it, she just moved. Instinct, she called it. This was the part that horrified ZarKeth most. Humans did not spend hours debating the logic of sacrifice. They did not calculate survival probabilities. They just acted, as if dying for others was the most natural thing in the world. He found video footage of Lieutenant Kevin Hart negotiating for hostages. The situation was deadlocked. Terrorists held 20 civilians and would execute them unless their demands were met. Hart offered himself as a replacement hostage. He walked into certain death to save people he had never met. The terrorists accepted. Hart was held for 3 months before a rescue team extracted him. He had been tortured regularly but refused to give any information that might endanger the rescue operation. ZarKeth watched the footage 17 times. Hart's face as he walked toward the terrorists showed fear. His bio readings would have been off the scale. Yet he walked steadily, calmly, as if this was simply what needed to be done. Petty Officer Steve Lucas was on a naval vessel when an explosive device detonated prematurely. The blast would kill everyone nearby. Lucas jumped on it, smothering the explosion with his body. He died instantly. 11 other sailors survived without injury. His family received a medal. His widow said he would have been embarrassed by the attention. ZarKeth read the letter Lucas had written to his wife before that deployment. It was mundane, talking about missing her cooking and wanting to see their daughter's next school play. There was no mention of heroism or sacrifice, just a normal human talking about normal life. Yet when the moment came, that normal human had thrown himself on an explosion without hesitation. The more ZarKeth studied, the more disturbed he became. This was not aberrant behavior in humans. This was normal, expected, honored. Human militaries gave medals for it. Human cultures wrote songs about it. Human parents told their children stories of people who sacrificed themselves for others. The Valorians had nothing like this. Their ancient history mentioned warriors, but the details were gone. ZarKeth suspected his ancestors had once possessed this trait. They must have. No species survived without occasionally fighting for survival. But somewhere in their evolution, Valorians had optimized it away. They had become perfectly logical, perfectly safe, perfectly dedicated to their own continued existence. They had become empty. ZarKeth realized this while watching footage of a human military funeral. The ceremony was simple. Soldiers in dress uniforms carried a flag-draped container. A woman, presumably the deceased's wife, accepted the folded flag. She cried. The soldiers cried. They stood in formation and saluted, holding the gesture for long seconds. This was grief. Not just sadness, but profound loss. Valorians experienced loss when someone died, but it was manageable, logical, temporary. The grief on these human faces was not manageable. It was raw and terrible and completely overwhelming, yet they honored it. They created elaborate rituals around death. They built monuments to the fallen. They spoke the names of the dead with reverence. They refused to forget. The Valorians forgot constantly. Death was a natural process. Bodies were recycled efficiently. The individual merged back into the collective resource pool. There were no monuments, no ceremonies, just the smooth continuation of civilization. Watching the human funeral, Zarketh felt something crack inside him. Not break, exactly. More like something frozen beginning to thaw. It was uncomfortable and strange, and he did not have words for it in his language. He accessed Earth's linguistic databases and found the word sorrow, not sadness, not mere disappointment. Sorrow. The deep, aching knowledge that something precious had been lost forever. Zarketh realized he was feeling sorrow for a species that was not his own. For humans who died before he was born. For soldiers who sacrificed themselves for causes he did not fully understand. He was mourning strangers. This should not be possible. Observer training included emotional regulation. Zarketh had perfect scores in maintaining professional detachment. Yet here he was, 3 hearts aching for humans he would never meet. He tried to write a report explaining what he had learned. The words would not come. How could he explain to Valorians that humans possessed something infinitely valuable that Valorians had lost? How could he make them understand that perfect survival was not the same as actually living? He drafted 7 different reports. All of them failed to capture what he needed to say. The data was there, the evidence was overwhelming, but the meaning kept slipping away. It was like trying to describe color to someone who had only ever seen in shades of gray. On the 8th attempt, Zarketh stopped trying to be professional. He wrote from the heart he was not supposed to have. Humans are dangerous because they have remembered something we forgot. They know they will die. They accept this completely. And then they choose to make that death mean something. They die for each other, for ideas, for abstract concepts like freedom and justice. They die because they cannot live with themselves if they let others suffer. This is not logical. This is not efficient. This is not survival-oriented behavior. But it is magnificent in a way that we have lost the capacity to comprehend. He attached all his research, all the footage, all the stories of human sacrifice. Then he added one final line. I am submitting my resignation from Expeditionary Observation Service effective immediately. I am going to Earth. I need to understand what it means to truly live before I die, having never existed at all. Zarketh sent the message to Valorian Command. Then he began plotting a course to Earth. He knew he would likely never return to Valorian space. His people would not understand his choice. They would think he had been compromised by exposure to primitive culture. They would be correct. He had been compromised by something they had long ago eliminated. He had been compromised by hope, by purpose, by the terrifying and beautiful possibility that existence could mean something more than mere survival. His hands shook as he entered the navigation coordinates. Not from fear, from anticipation. For the first time in his long life, Zarketh was choosing something that might kill him. He was flying into unknown territory to meet creatures who lived constantly on the edge of death. He was, in his own small way, beginning to understand what it meant to be human. The response from Valorian Command came within 3 hours. Observer Prime Kelvin's message was formal and cold. Resignations were not accepted. Observers served for life or until retirement age. Zarketh was neither old enough to retire nor physically impaired. His request was denied. He was ordered to return to the fleet immediately for psychological evaluation and reassignment. Zarketh read the message twice. Then he deleted it. He had already made his choice. For the first time in his life, he was choosing something that directly violated orders. The feeling was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. He wondered if this was how humans felt all the time, constantly making choices that could lead to disaster. His courier ship was small, designed for 1 occupant and short observation missions. It had faster-than-light capability but limited range. The journey to Earth would take 6 weeks, maybe 7 if he was conservative with power. He had enough supplies for 8 weeks. The math worked, barely. Zarketh disengaged from the observation post and set course for Earth. The ship accelerated smoothly, Neptune shrinking behind him. Within an hour, he activated the faster-than-light drive and the stars stretched into lines of light. The journey gave him time to think. Too much time, perhaps. He spent the first week organizing his research. The human military records were extensive, but they were only part of the picture. Humans did not just sacrifice themselves in war, they did it constantly in everyday life. Parents worked multiple jobs to feed their children. Doctors stayed awake for 30-hour shifts to save patients. Teachers spent their own money to buy supplies for students. Strangers donated organs to people they would never meet. The pattern was everywhere once Zarketh learned to see it. Humans built their entire civilization on the assumption that individuals would sacrifice for the collective good, not because they were forced to, but because they chose to. Most did it without even thinking about it. He watched human entertainment to understand their culture better. The stories they told themselves were revealing. Heroes who sacrificed everything to save others, villains who put their own survival above everything else. The message was clear and consistent across all human cultures. Selfishness was evil. Sacrifice was noble. Death could be meaningful if it served a purpose. Valorians had entertainment, but it was educational or meditative. Stories designed to convey information or promote calm mental states. Human entertainment was designed to make people feel things. Joy, sorrow, anger, fear, hope. They deliberately created emotional experiences and consumed them for pleasure. Zarketh watched a human film about a soldier who stayed behind to hold a position while his squad escaped. The soldier knew he would die. The film showed his fear, his acceptance, his final moments. Zarketh's 3 hearts ached watching it. The human audience, according to reviews, cried during that scene. They paid money to experience sorrow for a fictional character. This made no logical sense. Yet it was one of the most popular films in human history. He listened to human music. So much of it was about loss and longing and love. Humans sang about missing people who had died. They sang about love that ended badly. They sang about hope in the face of despair. The melodies were beautiful and painful, and Zarketh found himself replaying them constantly. Valorian music existed to promote mental harmony. It was mathematically perfect, designed to calm the mind and enhance concentration. It served a function. Human music served no function except to make people feel. Yet humans seemed to need it the way they needed food and water. Zarketh began to understand that humans were not just physically different from Valorians. They were fundamentally essentially different in how they experienced existence. Valorians optimized for survival and efficiency. Humans optimized for meaning and connection. Valorians eliminated pain and passion. Humans embraced both, even knowing they would lead to suffering. By the 3rd week, Zarketh had consumed thousands of hours of human cultural content. He read their poetry, studied their art, watched their films, listened to their music. He was trying to understand not just what humans did, but why they did it. A human poet named Mary Oliver had written something that stuck in his mind. "Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life?" Zarketh had no answer. He had spent his life observing, cataloging, remaining detached. He had done nothing wild or precious. He had simply existed, perfectly safe and perfectly empty. Humans only lived 100 years, maybe less. By Valorian standards, their lives were brief candles in the dark. Yet they burned so brightly. They crammed more meaning into their short lives than Valorians managed in centuries. They loved knowing they would lose. They created beauty knowing it would fade. They fought for causes knowing they might not live to see victory. They lived like every moment mattered because every moment did matter. There was no time for them to waste. No centuries to defer dreams or delay love or avoid risk. They had to choose now, live now, love now, or the opportunity would be gone forever. Zarketh, who would live another 200 years easily, realized he had wasted most of his life. He had centuries ahead of him and he had used them to simply exist, safely, carefully, meaninglessly. By the 4th week, Zarketh was composing his introduction to humanity. He knew he could not simply arrive in Earth orbit and hope for the best. He needed to announce himself, explain his intentions, and hope humans did not shoot first and ask questions later. He drafted the message carefully. He identified himself as Commander Zarketh of the Valorian Expeditionary Service. He explained that he had been observing Earth for months. He included evidence of his observations and his research. Then he made his request. He wanted to come to Earth. He wanted to understand humanity better. He wanted asylum because he could not return to his people. The message was honest to the point of vulnerability. Valorian diplomatic protocol would have called it weak and foolish. Zarketh did not care. Humans valued honesty. They respected vulnerability, or so his research suggested. He was betting his life on that research being correct. By the 5th week, Earth appeared on his long-range sensors. The blue and white sphere grew larger each day. Zarketh felt anticipation building in his chest and fear, real fear, not the calculated risk assessment that Valorians called fear. He was terrified that humans would reject him or worse, fail to live up to what he had seen in his research. He had built them up in his mind into something almost mythical. Noble warriors and selfless heroes. What if the reality disappointed? What if the sacrifice and courage he documented were exceptions, not the rule? What if most humans were as empty as most Valorians? On the final day of his journey, Zarketh sent his message. He aimed it at the largest military installation he could identify, a place called Edwards Air Force Base in California. Then he waited. The response came within an hour. A human voice, female, speaking perfect Valorian standard. The fact that they had learned his language was both impressive and slightly unsettling. How long had they known he was watching? Commander Zarketh, this is Colonel Kate Sullivan, United States Space Force Liaison. We received your message and your research. We've been aware of your observation post for approximately 3 months. We appreciate your honesty and your respect for our species. You are granted permission to land at Edwards Air Force Base. Transmitting coordinates now. Welcome to Earth, Commander. We've been expecting someone like you. That last line made Zarketh's 3 hearts skip. They had been expecting him. Or someone like him. That meant humans knew their actions would attract attention. They knew other species would watch them and wonder. And they did it anyway. Of course they did. Humans did not perform sacrifice for an audience.
They did it because they could not live with themselves if they did not.
Whether anyone watched or not was irrelevant. Zarketh adjusted his course for the landing coordinates. Earth filled his view screen now, beautiful and fragile and teeming with life. Somewhere down there were the soldiers he had watched fight impossible battles. The people who sacrificed themselves without hesitation. The species that refused to accept that anything was truly impossible. He was flying toward them not as an observer, but as a supplicant. He was coming to learn what his people had forgotten. He was coming to understand what it meant to truly live. The ship entered Earth's atmosphere, and Zarketh felt the vibration of re-entry. The shaking was uncomfortable but not dangerous. Still, his hands gripped the controls tightly. He was trusting himself to humans now, trusting that they would not shoot him down, trusting that their mercy was as real as their courage. The landing site appeared below, a vast flat expanse of concrete in a desert landscape. He could see vehicles waiting, small figures standing at attention. A welcoming committee. Zarketh brought his ship down gently. The landing was smooth. He sat for a moment, hands still on the controls, breathing in a way that Valorians rarely did. Deep breaths, calming breaths, human breaths. Then he stood, walked to the airlock and opened the door to meet humanity face to face. The air hit Zarketh first. Hot, dry, carrying the scent of dust and something else he could not identify. Vegetation, perhaps. His sensors had told him Earth's atmospheric composition, but experiencing it was different. The oxygen content was lower than Valorian standard. His breathing adjusted automatically. 3 humans stood waiting at the base of his ship's ramp. 2 wore military uniforms, standing at attention with weapons visible but not pointed at him. The third, a woman with graying hair and metal insignia on her uniform, stepped forward with her hand extended. Commander Zarketh. I'm Colonel Kate Sullivan. Welcome to Earth. Zarketh recognized the gesture from his research. A handshake, meant to show you carried no weapons and came in peace. He extended his own hand, which had 3 fingers and a thumb instead of 5 fingers. His hand was also slightly larger than hers and a pale blue color. Colonel Sullivan gripped his hand firmly and shook it once. Her skin was warm. Valorians ran cooler than humans. The difference was startling but not unpleasant. Thank you for allowing me to land, Zarketh said. He spoke in English, which he had studied extensively during his journey. I was uncertain of my reception. We read your research, Sullivan said. Anyone who spends that much time trying to understand us deserves a conversation at minimum. Come on, we've set up a meeting room. I imagine you have questions. We certainly have some for you. The facility was massive, filled with aircraft and vehicles and hundreds of humans going about their duties. Several stopped to stare at Zarketh as he passed. He was taller than most humans, thinner, with 4 arms instead of 2. His skin was blue and his eyes were larger and entirely black. He must look strange to them, alien, yet no one showed fear. Curiosity, yes, surprise, but not fear. The meeting room was simple. A table, chairs, water, and clear containers. A human male sat waiting, older than Sullivan, with gray hair and kind eyes. Sullivan introduced him as Dr. Paul Green, a linguist and cultural specialist. They talked for hours. Zarketh showed them his research, the battles he had observed, the historical records he had studied, the patterns of sacrifice that appeared throughout human culture. He explained how this contradicted everything Valorians understood about intelligent behavior. Dr. Green listened carefully and then asked a question that cut to the heart of everything. "Commander, when was the last time your people had something worth dying for?" The question stopped Zarketh cold. He searched his memory, his historical knowledge, everything he knew about Valorian civilization. They had goals: scientific advancement, territorial expansion, cultural preservation, but worth dying for nothing. If something was that dangerous, Valorians simply did not do it. "We do not," Zarketh said slowly. "We have optimized for survival above all else. We avoid danger. We calculate risk carefully. We only act when success is probable." "Then you don't really live," Colonel Sullivan said softly. "You just exist, going through motions, following patterns, surviving, but not living." "I am beginning to understand that," Zarketh admitted. "Watching your people, I have realized that my entire life has been empty. I have done nothing that mattered, nothing that required courage or sacrifice or faith. I have simply observed while others lived." Sullivan stood up. "Come with me. There are some people I want you to meet." Over the next several days, Zarketh met the people from his research. It had been arranged carefully, he realized. Sullivan and Green had prepared for his arrival, identified the subjects of his study, and brought them together. Captain Jake Morrison was first. He had retired from active service after the battle, Zarketh observed. He now taught at a military academy. Meeting him in person was surreal. Zarketh had watched this human fight an impossible battle. Now Morrison sat across from him drinking coffee and talking about leadership. "The thing people don't understand about command," Morrison said, "is that it's not about being the toughest or the smartest. It's about being willing to carry the weight. Every soldier under your command is someone's child, someone's spouse, someone's parent. When you order them into danger, you're asking them to risk everything. The least you can do is be worth that risk. But you were willing to die with them," Zarketh said. "You could have retreated. You had justification." Morrison shrugged. "I could have. But then I'd have to live with knowing I abandoned them. That's not survival, Commander. That's just breathing. There's a difference." Lieutenant Amy Fletcher showed Zarketh her current project. She was developing better protective equipment for soldiers. Her workshop was filled with prototypes and testing equipment. She worked with focused intensity, barely looking up as she explained her designs. "After that battle, I kept thinking about all the ways we almost lost," she said. "All the equipment failures, the gaps in protection, the things that could have been better. I can't change what happened, but I can make sure future soldiers have better gear. Maybe that means someone goes home to their family who otherwise wouldn't." Zarketh watched her work and saw the same determination she had shown building improvised explosives under fire. She had simply redirected it toward creation instead of destruction. The core drive remained. Make things better. Protect others. Refuse to accept unnecessary loss. Sergeant Ben Cole walked with a prosthetic leg. He moved easily, barely favoring it. He took Zarketh to a rehabilitation center where he volunteered, helping other wounded soldiers learn to use their prosthetics. "I was lucky," Cole said, watching a young soldier take his first steps on new legs. "I gotta keep doing my job for a while after I healed. Some of these kids, their careers ended with their injuries. They need to know they still matter. That losing a leg or an arm doesn't make them less valuable. You held your position while wounded," Zarketh said. "You should have died. By any calculation, you should have bled out before help arrived." Cole grinned. "Yeah, well, I'm stubborn. Plus, I had people depending on me. Couldn't let them down just because of a little bullet wound." He said it like it was a joke, but Zarketh had seen the bio readings. Multiple bullet wounds, massive blood loss, pain beyond what most species could endure. Yet Cole spoke of it casually, as if suffering that much for others was simply normal. Corporal Lisa Grant worked in cybersecurity now. She explained her current projects with enthusiasm, showing Zarketh defensive systems she had designed to protect civilian infrastructure. "Military hacking taught me how systems can be exploited," she said. "Now I use that knowledge to protect people. Power grids, hospitals, water treatment plants, All the infrastructure that keeps civilization running, someone has to defend it. You could make more money in the private sector, Zarketh observed. He had researched human economic systems. Yet you choose public service, Grant looked surprised. Of course. This work matters. Keeping hospitals running. Making sure people have clean water, that's important. Money's nice, but it's not why I do this. Every human Zarketh met echoed the same theme. They did their work because it mattered, because others depended on them, because someone had to do it. The financial compensation was secondary. The recognition was pleasant but unnecessary. They did it because not doing it was unthinkable. On his final day, Colonel Sullivan took Zarketh to Arlington National Cemetery. Row upon row of white markers stretched across green hills, hundreds of thousands of graves. Each one represented a human who had served their country and died. Some in combat, some in accidents, some from old age after long careers, all honored equally. This is just American military dead, Sullivan explained. Every nation has places like this. Every culture honors those who served, because they stood between their people and harm. That matters. That's always mattered to us. Zarketh walked among the graves slowly. Each marker had a name, dates, sometimes a brief description of service. He stopped at one randomly. Private Andrew Jackson, 1994-2014, died in service to his country, 20 years old. Barely an adult by human standards, his entire life ahead of him, gone. Why do humans accept this? Zarketh asked quietly. You know war kills. You know soldiers die, yet you still choose military service. You still send your children to fight. How do you bear it? Sullivan was quiet for a long moment. Because some things have to be defended. Freedom, justice, the right to live without fear, and because someone has to stand on the wall. If good people refuse to fight, evil people win by default. So we fight. We accept the cost. We honor the fallen, and we try to make their sacrifice mean something. She turned to face Zarketh fully. You came here seeking understanding. Here's what you need to know. Humans aren't special. We're not particularly noble or brave. We're scared most of the time, but we decided a long time ago that some things matter more than survival. Love matters. Freedom matters. Protecting each other matters. Maybe we're wrong. Maybe the universe doesn't care about our values, but we do. And that makes all the difference. Zarketh looked across the cemetery, hundreds of thousands of lives given in service. The cost was staggering. Yet humanity paid it generation after generation, accepting the price of their values. My people have survived for millions of years, Zarketh said. We have never risked ourselves unnecessarily. We have optimized for safety and survival. We should be stronger than humanity. We should be superior in